What if the stones of a cathedral could feel every prayer, every tear, every scream of war, and remember them? High above the skyline of Cologne, Germany, a sea of spires pierces the clouds, blackened by centuries of fire, soot, and sorrow. The Cologne Cathedral, or Kölner Dom, stands not just as a monument to faith, but as a living witness to everything that has passed beneath its shadow. To most, it's a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, soaring, symmetrical, magnificent. But to those who have walked its aisles at dusk, when the light fades and the organ hums like a whisper from the past, there is something else, something almost alive within its walls. They say if you stand perfectly still in the nave after sunset, the silence begins to breathe. You can hear echoes that don't belong to you. The creak of boots on stone. The distant sob of someone praying for a lost soul. The faint strike of a hammer on a chisel that hasn't been held in 600 years. The Cologne Cathedral, people whisper, absorbs emotion. It does not merely house faith, it feeds on it. Construction began in 1248. The air smelled of wet mortars and sweats as hundreds of laborers laid the foundation. They were building not for themselves, but for eternity. The plans were impossibly ambitious. 2 massive spires rising nearly 160 meters into the sky. Pointed arches that would pierce heaven itself, and stained glass so luminous it seemed to glow from within. But no one alive at the time would ever see it completed. Generations passed, builders died, wars came, and the stones waited. It took over 6 centuries to finish. Imagine that. A dream passed down from father to son, from apprentice to master. The same hands that shaped those stones never saw them rise. By the time it was completed in 1880, the world had changed. Yet the cathedral had stood, half finished, for hundreds of years, silent, patient, and full of secrets. Locals say those centuries left scars. They say the walls remember the plague when bodies piled outside its unfinished doors and priests refused to enter for fear of contagion. They remember the crusaders who knelt in its shadow, seeking forgiveness before leaving for holy wars they would never return from. They remember the lovers who met beneath the scaffolding at night, carving their initials into half-set stones. And they remember the screams when the bombs fell. During World War II, Cologne was nearly erased from existence. The city burned, buildings collapsed, streets turned to dust. But somehow, miraculously, the cathedral remained standing, blackened, battered, but unbroken. Allied pilots said it was impossible. The bombs fell all around it, leveling everything in sight, yet the dome endured. Some claimed divine intervention. Others whispered darker things, that the cathedral had absorbed too much grief, too much human emotion to ever die. After the war, the survivors of Cologne came back to find their homes in rubble. The city was silent, except for the cathedral. Its bells still hung, cracked but intact. People would gather beneath its charred walls, not to pray, but to feel something, hope, maybe, or simply proof that something, anything, had survived. But even survival carries a cost. Inside the cathedral, restorers began to notice strange things. During the repairs, they reported hearing footsteps in empty aisles. Tools would vanish overnight, only to reappear neatly stacked in the morning. One worker swore he heard chanting a Gregorian hymn that no one had sung there in decades. Another found an ancient chisel embedded in a pillar, perfectly preserved, as if someone had placed it there centuries ago and walked away. Yet, none of this was written in the reports. It was as if the cathedral demanded silence, as if revealing its secrets might awaken something. The stained glass windows are among the most extraordinary in the world, vast, towering mosaics of color and light. But if you look closely, some of the figures are not saints. Hidden faces peer through the panes, too human, too modern. One, positioned near the south transept, appears to be weeping. Art historians insist it's a trick of shadow and design, yet those who've stared at it long enough claim the tears shimmer when the sun rises behind it. There's a legend among the old families of Cologne, whispered by candlelight. They say that one of the original builders made a pact. His name was Gerhard von Ryle, the master architect of the cathedral. According to the tale, when he was tasked with constructing a church that reached heaven, he despaired, believing no mortal could complete such a work. One night, a stranger appeared to him, cloaked, faceless, offering help. The cathedral would rise. The stranger promised, but only if Gerhard signed with his blood. He agreed. The next morning, his designs were clearer than ever, his calculations perfect. The structure began to soar, but as the final stone was laid on the choir, Gerhard disappeared. Some say he fell into the Rhine, others say he was taken, claimed by whatever force had guided his hand. His body was never found. And so the legend began, that the cathedral's spirit was bound to his sacrifice, that its soul was born from a human life, willingly given. In centuries that followed, strange accidents plagued the workers. Stones slipped from scaffolds, killing those below. Fires broke out without cause. Each tragedy, they say, left an imprint, another emotion absorbed into the walls. And the darker the history, the heavier the cathedral seemed to become. Scientists today talk of resonance, of sound and vibration trapped within stone. They say, old buildings hold frequencies, that sound waves can linger for years. But when they tested the Cologne Cathedral's acoustics, the readings were abnormal. Certain frequencies would echo for longer than physically possible. In one section of the nave, sound refused to die. Even a whisper would drift and return like breath. A musicologist once described it as the building itself humming. He recorded the cathedral's resonance at night, with no human voices inside. When he played it back, beneath the natural hum, there was something else. Faint, rhythmic, almost like chanting. He destroyed the tape a week later. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of its strange aura, millions come every year. They stand in awe beneath the twin spires, craning their necks upward, feeling small and sacred all at once. Tourists click photos. Pilgrims weep. Lovers light candles. But a few visitors claim to feel something stronger. A chill. A heaviness pressing on their chest. As if the building itself is watching. One night, a caretaker named Lucas was locking up after midnight. The tourists were gone. Only the wind whispered through the arches. As he turned to leave, he heard a faint sound. A single organ note, drawn out and trembling. He froze. The organ was off. He walked back, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The sound grew soft at first, then layered, harmonizing, building. It wasn't just one note anymore. It was a melody, ancient and haunting. When Lucas reached the choir, the sound stopped. His light fell on something glimmering, a small pool of water at the base of the altar. But there had been no rain. He knelt, touched it. It was warm, almost like tears. He left his job 2 days later. Some say the cathedral mourns, that every joy and every sorrow poured into it over the centuries has made it sentient, a living relic of emotion. Others dismiss it as superstition, the imagination of those too overwhelmed by beauty to stay rational. Yet, anyone who has walked through its doors at twilight knows there's something unexplainable in the air. When the sunlight filters through the stained glass, it paints the floor with rivers of color, red like blood, gold like fire, blue like the Rhine. Every hue tells a story. Every shadow hides one. You can almost see the faces of those long gone flicker across the walls for a heartbeat, then vanish again into stone. Perhaps the cathedral isn't haunted in the way we think. Perhaps it's something else. Not cursed, but conscious. A monument built so perfectly, so passionately, that it became more than just stone and glass. A soul made of architecture. But if that's true, if the Cologne Cathedral truly remembers every emotion ever felt within it, then one question remains. What happens when it remembers something it was never meant to? Because deep beneath its floor, sealed away in the crypt, there's a door that hasn't been opened in over 200 years. And according to one archivist who studied the cathedral's blueprints, that door shouldn't exist at all. No official records mention the hidden door. It doesn't appear in blueprints, restoration documents, or architectural plans. And yet, under the cathedral's crypt, behind a wall of unmarked limestone, it exists. The archivist who found the anomaly, a man named Marcus Eberhardt, stumbled upon it while studying 18th century sketches of the cathedral's drainage tunnels. He noticed an inconsistency, a corridor that led nowhere, abruptly sealed by a blank wall. Intrigued, he requested permission to investigate. The church declined. That was in 1997, but Marcus didn't stop. He began his own quiet research, collecting testimonies from workers, priests, and even janitors who'd spent long nights beneath the cathedral. Some had felt drafts in places that should have been airtight. Others had heard faint mechanical sounds, clicks, groans, like gears shifting deep within the stone. One described a low hum beneath the crypt, a vibration that made the candle flames tremble. For years, Marcus obsessed over the mystery. He grew withdrawn, consumed. Then, in the winter of 2003, he vanished. The church issued no public statement, and the police found nothing unusual, only his apartment, where the walls were covered with sketches of the cathedral. In the center, drawn in dark ink, was a single phrase written in Latin, Porta Memoria, the gate of memory. After his disappearance, rumors spread. Some said Marcus had gone mad and fled the country. Others believed he'd found the door and whatever lay behind it. But among the older clergy, there were whispers that chilled even the most faithful, that the cathedral itself had taken him. Today, few are allowed into the crypt. The air down there is heavy, damp, with centuries of incense and dust. The walls are lined with tombs of archbishops and relics wrapped in gold and shadow. Beneath the flickering light of torches, the silence feels alive, as though the very air listens. Occasionally, water drips from the ceiling, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. Those who've descended claim to feel something, not fear, exactly, but a strange pull. One priest described it as being watched from inside the walls. Another said he could hear whispers that didn't match any language he knew. When asked to explain, he simply replied, "It was the cathedral remembering me." There is a theory, unproven, but persistent, that during the centuries of construction, builders sealed away unfinished chambers meant to stabilize the foundation. But in Gothic architecture, every space has purpose. Even voids are designed. So why seal a door? Why erase it from every record? Some historians think the answer lies in the cathedral's darkest century, the 1500s, when plague and Reformation tore Europe apart. Cologne was divided by faith, fear, and death. A rumor spread that the cathedral's relics had turned corrupt, that miracles ceased because the sacred had been contaminated by human sin. In desperation, the clergy performed a ritual of purification, sealing away what they called the vessel of grief. No one knows what that vessel was, a relic, an artifact, or perhaps something less tangible, but it was said to absorb pain. The priests believed that by locking it away beneath the altar, they could protect the cathedral from despair itself. What they may have created instead was a heart. Imagine a structure fed by centuries of emotion, joy, devotion, sorrow, terror, all funneling down through prayer and ritual, condensing into one place. What if the door doesn't hide something built, but something born? Modern engineers who have studied the cathedral's vibrations note that the frequency beneath the crypt is slightly different from the rest of the building. The resonance is deeper, almost like a pulse. Instruments have recorded faint tremors, rhythmic, steady, too regular to be random. Some dismiss it as the rumble of distant traffic. But the cathedral's foundations are thick, stone-encased, isolated. The sound, they say, comes from within. Late one night, in 2015, a restoration team working on the lower vault reported a minor collapse near the eastern wall. No one was injured. But when dust cleared, they found something extraordinary, a narrow passage hidden behind centuries of plaster. The team sealed it off almost immediately. Yet one worker, a woman named Anna, managed to take a single photograph before authorities arrived. The image showed a stone archway, half buried in rubble. Around it, faint carvings spiraled across the walls, lines, circles, and what looked like human figures kneeling. But the strangest detail was the door itself. It wasn't wooden or iron. As expected, it appeared to be made of the same stone as the cathedral, yet smoother, almost polished, as if worn down by countless hands. And in the center, a symbol, an eye carved within a heart. Anna was dismissed from the project a week later. She never spoke publicly about what she saw, except Once, in a radio interview years later, she said quietly, "I think it was breathing." Since then, the church has denied access to the crypt for independent reasons. Officially, the section remains under restoration. Unofficially, guards patrol it after dark. Even the caretakers don't go near the eastern wall. But sometimes, when night falls and the city quiets, locals say they can hear a deep hum rising from beneath the cathedral. Low, resonant, like a distant choir of voices buried in the earth. One man, a musician named Felix, who recorded acoustics inside the cathedral, captured that sound. When he played it back in the studio, something strange emerged. Hidden beneath the frequencies, there was a pattern, a repeating sequence of tones that matched the structure of human speech. Not language, exactly, but rhythm, a pulse of syllables, almost like a name being whispered. He isolated the sound, enhanced it, slowed it down. The name that surfaced chilled him to the core. It was the same name as the architect who vanished centuries ago. After that discovery, Felix deleted the file. But before he did, he wrote one final note in his journal. It's not echoing, it's remembering. Some say the cathedral is caught in a loop of memory, replaying moments of grief and devotion like a living recording of the human soul. Others believe it's evolving, slowly awakening from centuries of silence. The gate of memory, as Marcus called it, might not just be a hidden door, but a threshold, the point where human emotion becomes something tangible, something sentient. There's a story from an old nun who lived her entire life within sight of the cathedral. Every morning, she'd walk to the square to pray as the sun rose through the stained glass. In her final years, she confessed to her caretaker that the light had changed. "It used to shine through me," she said. "Now it looks back." The caretaker laughed at the time, thinking it the rambling of age. But on the day the nun passed away, the morning light inside the cathedral turned blood red. No clouds, no storms, just a deep crimson glow, spilling across the floor like the stain of a wound. It lasted only 3 minutes. Then it vanished. There was no logical explanation, no shift in the glass, no atmospheric cause. But those who witnessed it still talk about it. One priest said it felt as though the cathedral was grieving not for her death, but for losing a part of itself. It's said that places of great emotion can absorb energy, battlefields, hospitals, prisons, but few consider that sacred places, too, can collect the weight of centuries. The Cologne Cathedral has seen empires rise and fall, Prague's consumistes of faiths split and reconcile. Every prayer uttered within it is a spark, and perhaps after enough time, sparks become fire. If the cathedral has indeed awakened, if it remembers, then what does it seek? Forgiveness, recognition, or something darker? A recent discovery may offer a clue. In early 2022, thermal imaging scans were conducted on the cathedral to study moisture damage. But when the data came back, one anomaly stood out. Beneath the crypt, a distinct heat signature shaped like a human silhouette, motionless. Perfectly centered before the sealed section. The temperature reading was higher than its surroundings, as if something warm or alive was standing behind the stone. Engineers blamed an equipment error. The church dismissed it. The data was never released publicly. Yet, a leaked fragment of the scan shows the silhouette faintly glowing, its head tilted upward, as though looking toward the nav above. The workers who saw it began refusing night shifts. One was found praying in the nav at 3 a.m., trembling. When asked why, he said, "It wants to be seen." And maybe that's the truth, hidden in the cathedral's emotional walls. That, beneath the carvings and glass, the centuries of devotion and destruction, something human, or once human, is trying to surface. A soul born from collective faith, memory, and grief, pressing against the stone from the inside. If that sealed door is truly the gate of memory, perhaps it isn't meant to be open. Perhaps it was built not to hide something evil, but to contain something sacred, something that could overwhelm the world if released. Still, sometimes at night, when lightning cracks over the Rhine and thunder rolls through the valley, the cathedral trembles. The bells shudder, even when the ropes lie still. And for a brief moment, it sounds as though the entire building exhales. Those who've heard it say, it's not wind, not thunder, Not even the echo of time. It's a sigh. Deep, weary, and heartbreakingly human. And maybe, just maybe, it's the sound of the Cologne Cathedral remembering us back. The storm that rolled across Cologne that night was unlike any in recent memory. Thunder cracked in waves that seemed to shake the cathedral's very bones. And 4 hours lightning carved jagged lines across the sky, illuminating the black silhouette of the twin spires. The city slept uneasily beneath it. But inside the cathedral, something had awakened. The caretaker assigned that evening, a quiet man named Daniel, had been working there for nearly a decade. He'd seen power outages, winter floods, and even one earthquake tremor that sent the stained glass trembling like fragile water. But never this. As the wind howled outside, he noticed a strange vibration in the floor. Subtle at first, then rhythmic. Almost like the beat of a massive drum echoing below. He set his flashlight down and knelt, pressing his ear against the cold stone tiles of the nave. The sound was coming from beneath the crypt. He told himself it was just thunder reverberating through the structure. But the pattern was too precise. 3 steady beats. A pause. Then 3 again. The same sequence, over and over. A pattern. Deliberate. Intentional. When the next flash of lightning lit the stained glass above, Daniel saw something impossible. The colors shifted. The saints depicted as solemn, silent for centuries, appeared to be looking downward. Their faces slightly changed, as though their gaze had turned toward the crypt below. He stumbled back, blinking, certain his mind was playing tricks. But the moment his eyes adjusted, one of the glass panels flickered with movement. For a heartbeat, the blue figure of an angel rippled like water. And behind the painted halo, a faint shadow passed, too quick, too human. Down below, the hum grew louder. Daniel knew the stories. Of course, everyone who worked at the cathedral did, whispered legends about the sealed door, the breathing stone, the lost architect. He had laughed him off. Faith, he thought, was built on mystery. But this was no story. The sound beneath his feet was real, physical. Something alive. He hesitated only a moment before taking his keys and heading down into the crypt. The stone steps were slick with condensation, the air heavy with the scent of old wax and dust. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the carved tombs of bishops and saints, their faces serene, untouched by centuries. But tonight, even those marble eyes seemed to glimmer with unease. When he reached the eastern corridor, the one now sealed behind wooden scaffolding and warding signs, the hum was strongest. The vibrations traveled up through his shoes, into his bones. He placed a hand on the wall, and the stone was warm. He froze. In all his years maintaining the cathedral, the stone had never felt anything but cold. Now, it throbbed beneath his palm, a slow, steady pulse, like a heartbeat. He stepped back, terrified, but unable to look away. The storm outside roared louder, thunder echoing like cannon fire, and in that instant he heard something else, a whisper, not through his ears, but inside his head. It wasn't words, exactly. More like an impression, a feeling, forming into a single, heavy thought. You remember me? Daniel stumbled backward. His flashlight flickered, sputtered, then died. He was alone in total darkness. Moments later, the emergency lights kicked in, a dim red glow that painted the crypt like a tomb. And there, in the far corner, he saw it. The scaffolding had shifted. Dust filled the air, drifting like ash. A new crack had appeared in the wall. Thin, jagged, vertical. From within it seeped a faint golden light, pulsing in rhythm with the sound beneath his feet. He ran! The next morning, when other caretakers arrived, they found the eastern corridor sealed as usual. There were no cracks, no lights. Daniel's flashlight lay neatly beside the altar, its batteries drained. He never returned to work. But the storm had left a mark. Several stained glass panels had fractured overnight, specifically those depicting the building of the cathedral itself. In each one, the figure of the architect, Gerhard von Ryle, was gone, completely vanished from the glass, leaving behind only the faint outline of where he once stood. For historians, it was an impossible phenomenon. The glass was centuries old, chemically stable. It should not have changed. Yet microscopic analysis revealed the pigments had faded, only along those specific outlines, as if erased by something from within. In the following weeks, strange things began happening again. Tourists reported hearing faint music, not the organ, but a low choral hum that seemed to follow them through the aisles. Others claimed to smell burning incense, even when no candles were lit. The air grew heavy, almost electrical, as though the building itself was charged with invisible energy. A month later, a team of engineers returned to finish the thermal imaging survey abandoned earlier. This time, the heat signatures were clearer and multiplied. Not one silhouette, but dozens. Human shapes standing in a circle beneath the floor of the nave, motionless. Their heads all turned toward the same point, the sealed wall. When the lead engineer presented the data to the diocese, he was told to delete it immediately. The official reason was data corruption. But before he erased it, he saved a copy for himself. Later, he showed it to a friend, a physicist from Bonn. The physicist ran the thermal readings through software used for seismic pattern recognition and found something extraordinary. The frequency of the heat pulses matched the cathedral's natural resonance. In other words, the human shapes weren't anomalies at all. They were synchronized with the building's vibration. It was as though the cathedral was projecting them. This discovery changed everything. If the cathedral could imprint memory into stone, could it also manifest it? Were these echoes ghosts of those who built, prayed, and died here now, trapped in a perpetual loop, replaying their devotion for eternity? Or were they becoming something else, merging into the structure until there was no difference between the living and the sacred? As news of the leaked image spread quietly through academic circles, a small group of historians and scientists formed a covert team. They called themselves the Resonance Study. Their goal: to document the cathedral's anomalies without the church's interference. Among them was a linguist named Clara Weiss, a woman who had studied the acoustic properties of ancient temples. When she entered the Cologne Cathedral for the first time, she described it as standing inside a memory. Her instruments picked up frequencies inaudible to the human ear, layered in harmonic patterns that shouldn't exist naturally. But one frequency stood out, minus 18.6 hertz, the same frequency associated with the human eye's resonance. It causes unease, even fear. Clara began to suspect the cathedral wasn't just reacting to emotion, it was producing it. Every sigh, every whisper, every moment of awe inside those walls fed into a self-perpetuating cycle of sensation. The more people felt, the stronger it became. And then, one evening, as she stood alone in the nave, recording the faint hum that lingered after Vespers, she noticed something extraordinary. Her spectrometer was picking up a modulation, not random, but organized. She translated the peaks into sound waves, slowed them, filtered the noise. What she heard made her knees tremble. A voice. Faint, distant, layered beneath the hum. It spoke in Latin. Just one phrase, repeated over and over, memoria vivito. Memory lives. She didn't tell the others at first. She wanted to believe it was coincidence, a sonic illusion created by reverberation. But the next night, it changed. The same voice, clearer this time, spoke a second phrase, portata, pere tudu. The door opens. When Clara returned home that night, she found an envelope waiting at her door. Inside was an old parchment, fragile with age, bearing the cathedral's seal. The handwriting was 16th century Latin, a record of a rite of sealing performed by the archbishop in 1546. The document described an event of unholy awakening beneath the crypt, where the vessel of grief had begun to stir, whispering through the walls. It spoke of priests chanting through the night as the chamber was sealed in blood and faith. The final line read, "It must not wake again, or the memory of man will consume itself." She brought the parchment to her team. Most dismissed it as apocryphal. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and aware was pressing against the world from within those walls. Days later, she returned alone to the cathedral. It was late near midnight, and rain lashed against the spires. Inside, the candles flickered wildly, though there was no wind. She made her way to the crypt, heart pounding, recorder in hand. As she descended, the air grew warmer, thicker. The hum returned, deeper now, almost like the growl of a distant ocean. When she reached the sealed corridor, the sound became deafening. The wall before her, that same smooth, unbroken stone, seemed to ripple faintly, as though light moved beneath its surface. She stepped closer, whispering, "Is someone there?" A single knock answered from the other side. She froze, every instinct screaming to run. But something held her there, a pull, soft but irresistible, drawing her closer. Her hand rose slowly, trembling, until her fingertips brushed the stone. It was warm again, almost feverish. And then she heard it, not a voice this time, but a heartbeat. Slow, measured, human. The lights flickered, and in that instant she saw, not with her eyes, but in her mind, a flash of something vast and luminous behind the wall. A cathedral made of light, inverted beneath the real one, alive with movement. Figures walked through it, transparent and radiant, their faces sorrowful. At its center stood a man, head bowed, hands pressed against the door of glowing stone. She gasped. The figure raised its head, and though she had never seen him before, she knew his name instantly. The vision shattered. The hum stopped. Silence fell, so absolute, it rang in her ears. Then, slowly, a single line appeared across the stone, glowing faintly, a crack, just like the one Daniel had seen weeks earlier. Only this time, it didn't fade. Clara stumbled backward, staring as the glow intensified. Pulsing with that same steady rhythm, the heartbeat of something waking. The air filled with the sound of thousands of whispers overlapping, forming one unified breath that seemed to come from the cathedral itself. Then, from deep within the wall, she heard 3 words, clear, resonant, and human. "We remember you." The glow faded. The hum ceased. Clara collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, her eyes wet with tears she couldn't explain. She looked up, toward the ceiling, toward the massive vaults above, and saw the flicker of light moving across the stained glass. Once more, the angel's face, turned upward now, as if in prayer. Outside, the storm had stopped, but in the stillness that followed, every bell in the cathedral began to ring on its own. Not in chaos, but in harmony, a sound so hauntingly beautiful that the people of Cologne stepped into the streets to listen, unaware that beneath their feet the sealed door was beginning, ever so slightly, to open. The storm that had begun in whispers of stone was now raging inside Anna. The cathedral's secrets no longer lingered in shadow. They pressed against her like the weight of centuries, demanding release. The confession in the priest's journal had shattered her simple fascination. This was no longer about architecture or art. It was about grief. Faith, in the way guilt can cling to walls as if they were flesh. Rain lashed against the stained glass, distorting the colored saints into liquid phantoms. The aisles glowed with trembling light, as though heaven itself was unsure whether to bless or condemn this place. Anna moved through the nave like a ghost herself, her footsteps echoing softly against the mosaic floor. The journal trembled in her hand. The entries had ended abruptly, mid-sentence. And if the truth is sealed beneath, and nothing more. The ink had bled out, as though the writer's hand had been stopped, mid-breath. She couldn't leave it like that. The story had wrapped itself around her ribs. She needed to know what had been sealed beneath. In the crypt, silence was absolute. Even the city outside the car horns, the laughter of tourists, the hum of modern life. The air was heavy with damp stone and something older, something that felt like a prayer, long forgotten. Anna raised her flashlight and found the faded carving again. A winged figure holding a sword, its eyes hollowed by time. And below it an uneven slab of limestone, slightly discolored, out of alignment with the rest of the floor. Her breath caught. She pressed her hand against it. Cold, solid, but the faint outline of chisel marks betrayed that it had been moved before. Someone had opened this, someone desperate, She hesitated. The logical part of her mind screamed to stop. This was sacred ground, protected by history and faith, but another voice, something quieter, deeper, urged her on. The same voice that had brought her here in the first place, whispering through centuries of silence. She slid her fingers along the edge and found a hollow gap, just enough to wedge something beneath. The tip of her flashlight did the job. The stone shifted with a grinding sigh, releasing a gust of stale air that smelled of dust and decay. She coughed, covering her mouth. Then she leaned closer and shone the light inside. At first, she saw nothing but dirt and darkness. Then a glimpse of parchment, curled and brittle. A scrap of fabric, maybe linen, yellowed with time. And beneath it, bone, small, fragile, human. Anna recoiled, heart pounding in her ears. A child's skeleton, buried beneath the cathedral. She stared, unable to move. The world above heard the bells, the tourists, the sound of rain felt impossibly distant. Down here, time had stopped. When she finally gathered the courage to look again, she noticed a small wooden cross clasped in the child's hand. It was carved crudely, unevenly, yet with unmistakable care. Her flashlight beam quivered over, the markings etched into it letters, worn but still legible. The same initials from the priest's journal. A chill ran down her spine. This was the priest's child. The scandal, the shame, the reason for his exile all began and ended here. Beneath the cathedral he had once sworn to protect. But what haunted Anna wasn't just the tragedy of a forbidden love or secret burial. It was the weight of devotion, the kind that drove people to sin in the name of faith, and to faith in the shadow of sin. She sat back, her body trembling, as though she'd unearthed something far heavier than bone. The beam of her flashlight caught Mumena flicker, like a shadow stepping just out of sight. Her breath hitched. She turned sharply, scanning the crypt. Nothing. Just pillars, relics, and darkness. But then she heard it. The faint sound of whispering. Not words she could understand, but the cadence of prayer, soft, urgent, echoing against the cold stone. "Who's there?" she whispered. The prayer stopped. Her light swept across the far wall, catching on something she hadn't noticed before, a mosaic half buried in plaster. She stepped closer, brushing away the dust. It depicted an angel, but unlike the serene guardians above, this one was weeping. Its tears formed a river that ran through a burning city. Beneath it, in Latin, were the words, "The truth lies beneath what faith has built." Anna staggered back, realizing the journal's unfinished sentence mirrored that same line. The priest's confession wasn't incomplete, it was echoing the inscription that had been hidden down here for centuries. The realization hit her like thunder. The child buried below wasn't a secret meant to be erased. It was a message! A warning. She didn't know how long she stood there, breathing in the chill, trying to piece together the impossible. Then she became aware of something else, a faint vibration beneath her feet. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then the ground trembled again, more distinctly this time, followed by a muffled thud from above. She turned off her flashlight and listened. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming down the stairs. Her pulse quickened. No one was supposed to be here at this hour! She tucked the journal inside her coat and moved silently behind one of the stone pillars, the cold pressing against her back. The footsteps grew louder, echoing like the toll of a bell. A tall figure emerged from the shadows of the stairway, a man in a long black coat, carrying an old lantern instead of a flashlight. His face was obscured by the flickering glow, but his movements were deliberate. Reverent. He stopped near the open slab and stared down at the remains as though he'd expected to find them. Anna held her breath. The man knelt slowly and reached into the hollow, retrieving the wooden cross with a kind of fragile tenderness. Then he whispered something too soft to catch and placed it against his chest. It was as if the centuries had folded in on themselves. The priest. His secret. His sin. This man, who was he? A descendant. A keeper of the secret. When he finally turned, his face caught the light. Older than she expected, with deep lines carved by both time and sorrow. His eyes, however, were young, burning with conviction. "I knew someone would come," he said softly, his voice echoing in the crypt. "The walls remember everything." Anna froze, unsure if she'd been discovered or if he was speaking to someone else, to the dead, perhaps, or to the building itself. He looked around the crypt, his gaze lingering on the mosaic, on the shadows that stretched like veins across the stone. They tried to bury the truth, he continued, but you can't bury grief. It seeps through everything. Her heart pounded. She wanted to step forward to ask who he was, what he meant, but something stopped her. A sense that if she revealed herself now, the fragile thread holding this moment together would break. The man placed the cross gently back into the hollow, whispered another prayer, and began sealing the stone again, as though restoring a wound. Anna could feel tears welling in her eyes, not out of fear, but out of something she couldn't name. A deep, aching sorrow that belonged to more than her. When he finished, he turned toward the stairs and, without looking back, said quietly, "Some walls are built to hold faith, others to hold pain. The cathedral knows the difference." Then he was gone. She stayed in the darkness long after his footsteps faded. Outside, the storm had passed. Dawn's first light filtered through the stained glass, casting rivers of crimson and gold across the nave. The cathedral stood serene, majestic, as if nothing had happened. As if it hadn't just whispered centuries of grief to a single soul. Anna walked back up the aisle, her fingers trailing along the cold stone pillars. Each one felt alive now, pulsing faintly, like the heartbeat of something that had survived too much loss. But as she reached the great doors, she paused. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass display near the entrance, the one that showcased fragments of the cathedral's original foundation. And behind her reflection, faint but visible in the dim light, she saw an imprint on the wall. 2 small handprints, pressed deep into the stone. Her breath caught. They weren't there before. The walls, it seemed, still remembered. And for the first time, Anna wondered, had she uncovered a secret or awakened one? The morning light poured through the stained glass like liquid fire. It bled across the cathedral's ancient floor, spilling reds, golds, and blues into shapes that shimmered like memories half remembered. Anna stood frozen before those 2 small handprints, her breath forming pale ghosts in the cold air. They looked impossibly real, tiny impressions sunk deep into stone, as if pressed there not by time, but by longing. The same kind of longing that had bound this place for centuries. She reached out, trembling, and brushed her fingertips against the indentations. The stone was warm. A pulse seemed to move beneath the surface, faint, but rhythmic, like the echo of a heartbeat. She snatched her hand back, her mind whirling. Was it her imagination? A trick of adrenaline? Or had the cathedral truly begun to breathe? Outside, the bells began to toll. Their sound rolled across the sky like thunder, deep and resonant, shaking the air with solemn power. But beneath the chime, Anna thought she heard something else, a second sound, softer, hidden within the peal. A whispering hum, low and mournful, as if the building itself was singing a requiem no one else could hear. She followed the sound deeper into the nave, her footsteps quiet but sure. The air grew colder the closer she came to the choir stalls, where sunlight painted halos on the ancient wood. There, beneath the altar, a faint light flickered, a candle burning where no candle should be. Someone had been here after the man from the crypt. Anna approached, her eyes narrowing. The candle's flame wavered in the draft, illuminating something carved into the base of the altar. She crouched down and traced the inscription with her finger. Words in Latin. Her mind, still fogged with awe and fear, struggled to translate. Through the hands of the innocent, truth endures. Her chest tightened. The child, the priest, the hidden grave. It all converged into that one haunting phrase. As she leaned closer, she noticed that the candle wasn't sitting on wax drippings or stone, it rested on a sealed envelope. The parchment was yellow, brittle, marked with the same initials she'd seen before. Her breath caught. She hesitated only for a moment before picking it up. Inside, a single sheet of paper unfolded like a confession from the dead. The letter was written in the same hand as the journal. The priest's words, his final testament. To those who find this, know that what we built was not meant to hide sin, but to protect mercy? The child was not mine to claim, yet I could not let her be erased by those who feared imperfection within holiness. She was born beneath these walls. She died beneath them too. But her soul became part of this place. The cathedral remembers. It weeps when we do not. Forgive me, for I gave it life through sorrow. Anas bijom burado. The letter shook in her hands as tears welled in her eyes. The priest hadn't merely built a sanctuary, he had bound his grief into it. Every pillar, every spire, every mosaic window was a prayer carved from heartbreak. The emotional walls weren't just a metaphor, they were literal vessels of mourning, holding centuries of human pain, repentance, and love. A gust of wind swept through the nave, extinguishing the candle. For an instant, the entire cathedral plunged into silence. Then creaking, almost imperceptible, a low groan resonated from above. She looked up. The stained glass windows flickered with strange movement. Faces seemed to shift within the colored glass, saints bending their heads, angels turning their eyes downward, a child's silhouette appearing faintly within the crimson glow. It was as though the cathedral itself was alive, acknowledging her presence. Anna stumbled backward, her heart hammering. She wanted to run, but something held her. There were gravity and understanding. The cathedral wasn't warning her. It was showing her what she had come to see. A wave of warmth rippled through the air, followed by an overwhelming scent of myrrh and rain. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in Cologne anymore. She saw the priest kneeling before the unfinished altar centuries ago, his face streaked with tears, his hands trembling as he sealed the small body into the earth. Around him, the other builders worked in silence, masons and apprentices, who all turned their faces away. He whispered a prayer not for salvation, but for remembrance. Then came centuries of silence wars that shook the city. Fires that licked the spires. Bombs that shattered the roof during the Second World War. And still, beneath it all, the cathedral endured. The handprints remained. The child's soul, entwined with faith, waited in stillness. The vision dissolved, leaving Anna gasping on the cold floor. The morning had brightened now, sunlight slicing through dust and sorrow alike. But something had changed. The air was lighter, as if the weight pressing on the cathedral had finally begun to lift. She turned toward the great organ at the far end of the nave. It loomed like a mountain of sound, dormant, yet alive. Drawn by impulse, she approached the console, fingers brushing over the keys. She hesitated, then pressed one note. The sound filled the cathedral, not loud, but pure. The tone lingered in the air, vibrating through the walls, and something deep within the stone answered. Another note followed, then another. Slowly, hesitantly, Anna played. The melody wasn't one, she knew. It seemed to rise from the floor itself, from the buried history beneath her feet. A lullaby, a prayer, the kind of song a mother might sing to calm a frightened child. As the final note faded, she heard footsteps again, this time light, careful, familiar. She turned. The man from the crypt stood in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. But his eyes weren't stern now. They were wet with tears. "You found it," he said softly. Anna swallowed. She shouldn't have been forgotten. He nodded. She wasn't. The cathedral made sure of that. For a long moment, they stood in silence, surrounded by the shifting light. Then he stepped forward and handed her something small, a ring, old and worn, engraved with the same initials that marked the cross and the journal. "It's been passed down," he said. "From those who knew the story, from the builders to the keepers. But no one ever understood it until now." Anna looked down at the ring, feeling its weight. "What happens now?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and peace. "Now she can rest. And so can he?" The bells began to toll again, slow, deliberate, echoing like a final benediction. The man turned to leave, his silhouette framed by the open doors and the soft radiance of dawn. But before he stepped into the light, he paused and glanced back. "You should stay a moment longer," he said. "The cathedral has one more thing to show you." Then he was gone. Anna stood alone. The sound of the bells lingered, merging with the distant hum of the waking city. She turned toward the altar once more, and there where the candle had burned something shimmered. A reflection, faint but distinct, appeared on the polished stone surface. A woman's face. Not hers. The features were delicate, serene, framed by a wimple of white cloth. Eyes closed. Lips curved in a faint smile. And in her arms, burly Visabella, small child, sleeping peacefully. The image wavered, then dissolved into light. Honest tears fell freely now. The revelation wasn't terrifying, it was tender. The cathedral wasn't haunted by guilt. It was sanctified by remembrance. Every echo, every crack in the wall, every note from the organ was all part of a living requiem, built not for death, but for forgiveness. Outside, the bells gave their final chime. The sunlight grew stronger, washing the nave in brilliance. Dust floated like gold in the air. Anna stood motionless, breathing deeply, feeling the stillness settle over her like a blessing. She realized then that the cathedral had not shown her these things to frighten or to claim her. It had trusted her with the truth, with the burden it had carried alone for so long. And as she turned to leave, her eyes caught the wall one last time. The handprints were still there, but now they seemed softer. Almost luminous, as though light were radiating from within the stone itself. She smiled faintly, whispering into the silence. Rest now. And for the first time since she had stepped into this vast, mournful house of God, the air felt lighter. The walls, once heavy with sorrow, exhaled. Outside, Cologne was waking the streets alive with the sound of mourning. But behind her, the cathedral stood like a living heart, its spires piercing heaven, its stones forever carrying the pulse of those who had loved, lost, and believed within its embrace. As Anna walked away, she could still feel the faint warmth on her fingertips from where she had touched the wall. And she knew no matter how far she went, that part of her now lived within those emotional walls. A fragment of witness. A keeper of the truth that had finally been heard. The cathedral, for the first time in centuries, was silent, but not empty. It was at peace! The city outside had fully awakened by the time Anna reached the square. Morning light spilled across the cobblestones, warming the air that still carried the faint scent of rain. The cathedral towered behind her, its blackened spires piercing the clouds, its bells quiet now, as if finally allowed to rest. She turned back once, eyes tracing the familiar lines of the Gothic facade. Somehow, it looked different. Softer. Alive. The weight that once clung to it like shadow had lifted, replaced by something she couldn't name. Not joy exactly, but a stillness that felt earned. She stood there for a long while, watching how sunlight glided over the stone gargoyles, over saints frozen in their watch, over centuries of devotion carved by hands long turned to dust. People passed by, snapping photos, laughing, oblivious to the invisible story, breathing just beneath their feet. For a moment, she envied their ignorance. Then she smiled faintly, realizing the secret was safe, now not because it was hidden, but because it was understood. In her pocket, the ring the old man had given her pressed lightly against her palm. Its metal was cool, but she could almost feel the warmth of all the hands that had carried it before hers, the builders, the priests, the silent keepers of truth. She held it up to the light, and for a brief instant, she thought she saw something shimmer within the curve of the band, like a reflection of candlelight flickering in an unseen room. Then it faded, leaving only the ordinary dull gleam of age. The cathedral bells remained silent, but she could still hear their echo inside, her deep, resonant, eternal. Every note seemed to pulse through her chest, reminding her that some places are not made of stone at all. They are built from the emotions of those who loved them enough to leave a piece of themselves behind. She began walking toward the river. The Rhine shimmered under the morning sun, restless and alive, carrying centuries of stories past the cathedral's shadow. The air was crisp, full of distant church bells, the chatter of markets setting up for the day, the soft roar of water against the banks. Life was moving forward as it always had. But to Anna, the world felt slightly tilted, like she had seen the hidden thread that ran beneath it all and could never unsee it again. She found a quiet bench overlooking the river and sat down, pulling out her notebook. It had been empty when she first arrived in Cologne, a simple travel diary meant for architectural notes and sketches. Now, as she opened it, the blank pages seemed to wait for something different, something closer to prayer than record. Her pen hovered over the paper. Then she began to write. Not about the skeleton in the crypt, or the priest's confession, or the miracle of the walls that breathe. Those details no longer mattered in the way she had thought they would. Instead, she wrote about the feeling the moment the cathedral had gone silent after centuries of holding its breath. The way light had shifted through the stained glass, the warmth of stone that had no right to feel alive. Each word flowed slowly, carefully. She wrote about forgiveness, about how it never truly comes from above or below, but from within. She wrote about grief as something sacred, not to be hidden but to be tended, like a candle that refuses to go out even in the darkest storms. She wrote about this strange truth that sometimes the walls we build to keep sorrow out end up becoming the very places where it finds peace. When she finished, the page was wet with tears she hadn't noticed falling. She closed the notebook gently, as if sealing a secret. The river kept moving. Behind her, she heard the faintest sound, a single bell ringing. One soft chime. She turned, eyes drawn back to the cathedral's spires. No one else seemed to notice. The sound faded quickly, like the last heartbeat of a long story finally come to rest. She stood and began walking again, this time without hurry. Each step felt lighter, freer. Yet beneath her calm, she carried a strange ache, not pain, but the quiet knowledge that she had touched something ancient and human, something that would never fully leave her. The cathedral would remain where it had always been, but part of it now lived in her, whispering through memory. As she crossed the bridge, she glanced back one last time. Sunlight poured down upon the cathedral, drenching its dark towers in gold. Birds circled the highest spire, their wings catching the light as they rose higher and higher into the sky. In that moment, she understood what the old man had meant. The cathedral had not been haunted by its secrets. It had been sanctified by them. Every sorrow carved into its walls had become a note in a symphony that only the heart could hear. It wasn't a monument to faith alone, but to the full weight of being human to love. The loss, the guilt, and the hope that all find their way into prayer. Eventually, and in that understanding, she realized that maybe all great structures, hearts, even lives are built the same way. Through years of labor, cracks repaired, losses buried, and the constant fragility reaching upward toward something greater than ourselves. She slipped the ring back into her pocket and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the priest, not to the child, not even to the man who had guided her, but to the walls themselves for listening, for remembering, for reminding her that every silence holds a story if you stand still long enough to hear it. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, carrying faint echoes across the river. She thought she heard laughter, soft, childlike, blending with the murmur of the water. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her, neither afraid nor questioning. Some things, she realized, are meant to remain mysteries, not puzzles to solve, but truths to feel. As she opened her eyes, the world seemed sharper. The colors richer. The sound of lithe bells, the footsteps, the river felt like part of a single, endless song. She walked until the cathedral disappeared behind the curve of the city, its great spires swallowed by distance and light. But even unseen, she felt its presence, a steady pulse somewhere deep within her chest, reminding her of the night it had spoken through stone and sorrow. And as she moved through the crowd, blending into the living rhythm of the city, a quiet question lingered in her mind. One she knew would never leave her. If walls can remember, then what do we, in our silence, choose to forget? The answer never came. But maybe that was the point. Because somewhere behind her, high above the river and the rooftops, the cathedral stood, bathed in sunlight, its emotional walls no longer weeping, but listening. Always listening! And in the hush that followed, it almost sounded like the city itself was breathing in time with Ida's shared heartbeat, vast and ancient, carrying forward through every passing century, whispering the same truth the priest had once carved into stone. That love, no matter how buried, never dies. It only changes its shape, waiting to be found again. As the last light of morning struck the highest spire, Anna stopped at the far end of the bridge and turned her face toward the sun. The warmth touched her skin, and for a moment, it felt like the cathedral's breath, gentle and forgiving. Then she smiled quietly and walked on her footsteps, fading into the hum of life. The sound of forgiveness and the eternal heartbeat of stone.